Okay, so this time we're going to go over Second Thoughts video on neoliberalism, and um, specifically, we're just going to be going over the language he uses to paint a picture to get you to side with his point of view without actually using a lot of mm, I don't want to say information because that's not entirely accurate, but he's going to slant things in a particular way to get you to um, line up with his point of view on this. So we're just going to go over this one real quick, mostly because I mean his videos are typically pretty short, which is really disappointing because like these kind of topics, like usually when you see someone discussing them, they're like an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours long because this stuff gets really nuanced, and like you can really dive deep into these topics. So it's really disappointing that he only puts these out like I think like once a week. But even if it's once a day, like this is what he does for a living. So like this, anyways. Um, Setting aside the fact that I'm jealous that he only gets his output is like 20 minutes worth of work for a whole week, and he doesn't really go into much detail. Let's just go over to the video. So, oops, that's the wrong thing.
Made possible by Audible.
Progress is being made. If you stick a knife in my back 9 inches and pull it out 6 inches, there's no progress. You pull it all the way out, that's not progress. The progress is healing the wound that's a blow made. And they haven't even begun to pull a knife out, much less try and heal the wound. They won't even admit the knife is there.
You know how Thanksgiving sucks and always ends up becoming about what's happening with politics that week? This episode is kind of about that. Hello, Internet types. On this episode of Old Man Yells at Cloud, we're complaining about the politics of lesser evil, or harm reduction discourse. I'm gonna make a big deal about it.
So he starts off by satirizing himself, right? Comparing himself to Grandpa Simpson. This is to disarm you. This is to get you to think that he doesn't take himself very seriously, and that he's kind of a crackpot.
This because, well, I'm that old man. I'm upset, and it sucks.
Also, we tend to appreciate when people can make fun of themselves. People who are too serious and like can't crack a joke about their own behavior or viewpoints or mentality tend to not be as appealing as people who can look at that with a bit of humor.
Because I'd like to live in a true democracy, and I don't. And if you live in the same kind of non-democracy as I do, here in sunny USA, you might not be happy about it either.
Okay, so there's another set of phrases that he's using there. So he wants to live in a true democracy and claims that he currently lives in a non-democracy. This is not entirely true on either sense, right? So a true democracy would be every person voting on every single thing individually. This means that anytime Congress passes legislation, it wouldn't be Congress, who are representative individuals, voting on legislation. These would basically be nationwide referendums over and over and over. So anytime we want a law passed, that's what a quote unquote true democracy would be. Now, I am jumping to a conclusion here, right? He may not mean that when he says a true democracy, but as far as like how he would phrase this, I can't think of what else he would mean, because we understand that the idea of every single citizen voting on every single issue is a bit outlandish, right? Nothing would, like, the complaint is that nothing gets done in the first place. But can you imagine how little would get done if everyone had to vote on everything? And then secondly, he claims that we live in a non-democracy. Now, this isn't true, right? You get to vote on the representatives who are supposed to represent your views in these branches. And whether they are or they are not doesn't mean that you live in a non-democracy, right? So, and this is one of those, like I was saying earlier, there's a lot of nuance in here, right? If he wants to talk about how representatives aren't representing their constituents, okay, that's accurate, right? And you can see this in the Build Back Better bill, right? Joe Manchin kept talking about how he was concerned about this, that, and the next thing, and he wanted certain things cut. But when you poll in West Virginia, the state that he represents in Congress, the lowest, the lowest part, or what are those called? the individual pieces, right? So like they wanted to fund this thing and they want to fund that thing. The part of that legislation with the lowest amount of support still has 60% of West Virginia voters in favor of just that individual piece of the bill. 60% in favor. In political terms, that is a landslide. And that was the least popular piece of the bill. Or I'm sorry, not even a piece of the bill, because it was the least popular thing that required funding that was listed in the bill specifically, right? So if he wants to talk about the lack of representation actually representing their voter base, okay, there's nuance there. We can talk about that. But that doesn't mean you live in a non-democracy, and it doesn't mean that you want to live in a true democracy. It just means that you want the people who are in these positions that are supposed to represent you, and they're not. And this is not the same thing as a non-democracy.
So let's talk about that. And as we get started, allow me to read out the long, tedious disclaimer paragraph I've spent more time on than the rest of this video. I am not an accelerationist. I do not wish to see people's material conditions worsen in the short term on the hope that they will get so bad that things will swing the other way in some imprecise future. That doesn't work. I am also not policing what you choose to do. Vote blue or don't vote blue. If you live anywhere here, it probably doesn't even matter. And no matter where you live, it'll usually only matter a tiny bit.
Okay. So this is... He's trying to create a sense of powerlessness, right? So look at these states. These are the swing states. I'm sorry, non-swing states. Can't read. So these are non-swing states. So what that means is these are states that vote red, period. That have voted red for decades, period. But additionally, what a non-swing state is these are states that have very little impact on the presidential election because they're written off. Now, he's doing this from a Democratic perspective. Florida goes red, Virginia goes red, so on and so forth, right? But you can say the same thing on the other side, right? California always goes blue. What's another big? New York always goes blue. So on and so forth, right? So the idea that only Democrats have no voting power in their states because of the all or nothing concept that the Electoral College is again misleading, because there are lots of other places where people's vote doesn't count because the entirety of the vote of that state just goes to whoever wins the state. So a good example, I don't have an example, like a literal example, but for instance, in 2020, if Biden won California by 51-49 against Trump, that means the entirety of California goes to Biden, despite the fact that almost half of the people who lived in the state wanted Trump. Now, does this, and this applies to every single state, and there are states that are worth a ton of votes, and what this ends up causing is that they don't and in conjunction with the non-swing states, the states that always vote in a certain direction, this means that the states that really actually, I don't want to say decide because it is vote totals, but the states that tend to not be confidently red or blue, that you can predict with almost unerring accuracy, are very few in number. I think it's something like 7 states in total are what they call battleground states. These are states where there is enough of the population that can swing one way or the other that who they're going to is uncertain, and that's where that's where presidential elections focus their efforts. It's where they focus their money. It's where they focus their rallies and their time. Which means that if you live in California and you're a Republican, the entire party has written you off. Your vote doesn't count. Your vote doesn't matter because you live in a blue state. In the same way that if you live in Florida and you're a Democrat, same thing. Your vote doesn't count. Your vote doesn't matter. They're not trying to get your vote because either you're already going to vote for them anyways, or even if you do, the state's going red and therefore they're not going to get that. They're not going to get that vote. So this is accurate, but it plays to both sides. And that's another topic that he won't get into. unfortunately, which I think would be a really good topic. Like, I've heard a lot of people discuss this, and I'm just going to throw in my idea here in the ring that I think it was it Massachusetts or Michigan? I forget, one of the states just last year, or not last year, a while ago, I forget when, they implemented ranked choice voting. And I don't want to get too deep into this, but one of the major issues with winner-take-all voting is that it disincentivizes voting. It also incentivizes voting for the person you think is just going to win over the other guy and not who you actually want in office. So that rather than voting on actual policy, you just vote on popularity, which that's not the same thing. It's not even close to the same thing. And that causes a bunch of issues. Whereas, and the reason for that is because if you don't vote for the guy who wins, your vote, if you don't vote for the guy who's going to win, your vote is wasted. So if there's four candidates running, and we're only going to count the top two to determine who wins, then if you vote for someone who isn't one of the top two most popular candidates, then your vote won't count towards the total. Therefore, your vote is wasted. Whereas with ranked choice voting, you pick, okay, I want my vote to go to this person. If this person isn't qualified for the running, then I want my vote to go to this person. And if that person isn't qualified for the running, so on and so forth, until your vote goes to a candidate that is qualified for the running, which means that you don't have a wasted vote, which means that you are incentivized to vote because you don't feel like your vote isn't going into the ether, not being counted.
Just enough to make it worth getting it over with and voting, but probably not much more. Not for nothing, voting sucks because the blue team sucks. I know that. I know, as you can see from this video about the ratchet effect I made a couple months ago, that voting for the lesser evil doesn't do anything for progress, and that our politics move further right over time thanks to the increasing power of corporate interest since the takeover of Neo-Liberalism in the 80s.
I can easily demonstrate this. That's not entirely accurate. What's voting like on gay rights? Okay. Do you see how he'll use an overall view to then skew what he's going to present? So this is really simple. Have things moved right in certain respects? Well, yes. Conversations about prison reform, conversations about gun rights, conversations about military spending, or a lot of things. There's too many to list. So in some facets, yes, things do move right. But whose fault is that? Is that because when, as his other video will claim, is that because when the right gets in power, they move things to the right, and then when the left gets in power, they won't actually move things to the left. They just keep things from moving farther to the right. So therefore, all we ever do is move right. Well, no, that's not accurate, right? Acceptance of gay people is like the norm now, whereas like before it was very, very low percentages. Acceptance of trans people has increased over the years. Acceptance of gay marriage is like normal now. People think it's silly if you're against gay marriage. So this idea, like, that's just patently false. But rather than go into the nuance of that, he's going to use an impression, which you get through the general direction that politics has gone, the general direction that the Overton window has gone. But like a real simple example is we're now talking about universal healthcare in the country, where had you tried to talk about universal healthcare 4 years ago, you would have been written off as a laughingstock. But it's a serious conversation that we're having nowadays. So, anyways.
That sucks too. I also know that letting presidents go from far-right, fascist, proto-fascist, whatever, to the same guy but worse 4 years later, and at whatever pace they dictate, is bad too.
Okay, so this is, he uses the word fascist in a number of directions here. Now, was Trump's approach to the presidency authoritarian? Yes, but how much of that is because Trump is the CEO and he thinks like a CEO? CEOs have 100% power over what their companies do, and you can say that the board of directors has a say-so, but like that's like saying Congress could have impeached him, right? Like, yes, there are other people in positions of power who have the ability to override what he's doing or oust him, but that would require that they don't actually agree with his direction, which at least 50% of them do agree with the direction he was trying to take the country, right? So that doesn't make him a fascist, right? Fascism is literally the merging of state and corporation. This is, and not in the sense that like the state controls industry, which is what they claim communism is, which that's not accurate either. That is the fascism is the combination of, or the culmination of state and corporate power. And it's the opposite direction. It means that corporations are directed by the government to do certain things. In our case, it wouldn't be too far-fetched to call us fascist, because the government already has so much control over industries like the military-industrial complex, like pharmaceuticals, right? The problem is that government, I don't want to get into that because that's kind of a tangential, but we are not a fascist country, and Trump's agenda was not fascist. That doesn't mean it was a good agenda. It doesn't mean it wasn't right wing, and that doesn't mean it wasn't authoritarian. But to call him fascist is inaccurate. Proto-fascist is correct, but he didn't dive into the specifics there. So proto-fascism is someone who is not fascist, but whose policies lay the groundwork for fascism, which is not the same thing. So that's like saying the Weimar Republic was the Weimar Republic was proto-fascist, but nothing in their policy agenda was actually fascist. They just happened to lay the groundwork for Hitler to come to power, who was a fascist. So like, he's not technically misusing these words, but because he's not diving into the nuance of how this applies, he's absolutely being misleading with this information.
Worse even, I am well aware of all that. I'm not gonna try to deny any of these claims in this video. Stopping some form of far-right politics with regular right-wing politics doesn't make anybody happy except those on the right.
Okay, and I love how he's showing Biden here in this example of Trump being the far right-wing and Biden being the not-so-far right-wing. What has Biden done that's right-wing? Now, he hasn't made great strides, or he doesn't line up with, like, quote-unquote lefties on a lot of things, like economics or immigration. And if we want to denounce what he's done, his immigration policy is actually not that good. It's actually pretty terrible. But like, he pulled out of Afghanistan. He was the only president willing to take that hit to get our troops back home, which is something that every president has said since Obama. Does that sound right wing to you? What else has he done? Well, I mean, I'm disappointed in his support of the Build Back Better bill, and he could have done a lot more in that regard. But he made a pathetic attempt to try and get the Build Back Better bill passed. He introduced the infrastructure bill, which you can call it a corporate handout because it kind of is, but that's not right wing, right? That's just both parties agree on corporate handouts. So that is Biden a lefty? No, of course not. Is Biden more left than Donald Trump? Well, duh. I think most people are. But is Biden right wing? No. Is he far left? No. I'd call him barely moderate left. I would call him conservative left. Right? But because this doesn't line up with Second Thought's idea of what leftism is, he calls him right. And it's like, okay, well, where's your perspective? Like, where we compared to what?
But just because I know that fact doesn't mean I won't do it when I think there's an option. But I hate that I have to say this, and I hate that even though I despise this guy and his buddies, I just spent like 45 seconds sort of defending him and probably making you upset in the process.
You notice how he uses like one of the most unappealing pictures he can of Biden?
I want to do not that. The good thing is that that's not what this video is going to be about. But it's just close enough to being about that I want to get ahead of people who comment before watching all the way through. This week, we're looking at the discourse of lesser evils, because even if, at the very least, part of the lesser evil political strategy does stave off some of the most evil politics the previous 4 years have cooked up, another part of that discourse is weaponized to narrow down politics to what you do at the ballot box and nothing else. And that's a big problem worth making a video about.
Okay, so I hate the term evil in the same way that I hate the term, well, the equivocation of good and evil, right? A policy is not good or evil. It is relevant or not relevant. It is applicable or not applicable. It either solves a problem or it doesn't. Now, this doesn't make it evil. It makes it ineffective. But and this is where the harm reduction conversation kind of takes a turn I don't like. Politicians aren't evil. Are they greedy? Are they stupid? Are they silly? Are they partisan? Are they hacks? Yes, to all of those things, right? But I would never say, oh, I shouldn't say never, because that's not necessarily true. But I wouldn't say that these people are evil. I think that they either choose not to understand all of the relevant information, or they just simply aren't aware of it. And if they're not aware of it, I don't blame them. Every topic, all the time, is getting constantly researched. Modern monetary theory is proposed as a alternative to Keynesian economics. Socialism has been, I don't want to say revamped, but like the idea of socialism is not what it was when it was first presented back in Marx's time, which wasn't the same as what was presented, or what the ideology behind the formation of the USSR. Like, these ideas are constantly changing, and they're taking applications of these ideologies and what doesn't work and reforming them in to apply what does work. So this is just, if someone points to anything political and calls it evil, that's a ridiculous reduction of what it actually is.
Because if you're just a normal person who considers themselves a liberal and you've used this sort of rhetoric before, I truly, genuinely believe you have good intentions. This video is hopefully just going to point out the ways in which those intentions don't always match up with the consequences. Either because politicians will take advantage of your good intentions for stuff you disagree with, or because you'll spend so much effort on the elections that everything else kind of disappears between electoral cycles.
So this is absolutely an appeal to your good nature. Oh, you're not the problem. I know as a voter you mean well. That's not necessarily true. Some people do vote out of spite. Some people do vote on policies that they don't think is going to actually address the problem, but they do it just because it's what's on their party's ticket. Which, by the way, Americans are awful at this. I've talked about this before, but if you I don't want to get too far into it, but people absolutely vote along party lines, regardless of what the actual policy is.
Okay, disclaimer over. Back to having fun. Fart noise. Great. Now we're having fun again.
Okay, and this is, again, the derivation of what he's talking about. See, I'm silly. I don't take this too seriously. This can be a joke to me, too.
Take my internet hand. Don't worry about how it feels. I have a condition. And let's talk about this. First, we should go over how much the lesser evil stuff works out to be in the end by giving a little account of the Biden presidency so far. Consider this when you spend so much effort on the presidential election. Because despite Biden running on, quote, the most progressive Democratic agenda America has ever seen,
to be clear, when I'm pausing on this because that headline is a lie. This is not the most progressive agenda. In some respects it is, but the most progressive presidential agenda was, I'm pretty sure it was called the New Deal, right? Didn't it? It totally reformed how we handle. I don't. That's too much. I don't want to get into it. But like, its
policies amount to little more than taking one step forward after the Trump presidency took 2 steps back. On the plus side, Biden has canceled plans for the Keystone Pipeline, has reversed Trump-era policies on methane emissions, has overturned the Muslim ban, freed up resources to deal with the 2017 hurricane that hit Puerto Rico, passed a child tax credit to reduce child poverty, extended the pause on student loan repayment, and resumed a pause on federal executions.
Okay, so these are all progressive things. Here comes the but.
Those are the handful of things that Biden has done that most on the left consider fine-ish. Not progress, just I can't believe it got to this point in the first place.
Whoa. That's not true. There are plenty of people who look at what he's done and go and think that's good. Now, there are a lot more people on the left who don't think that's enough, who think it was ridiculous that it got to this point. But the idea that every Democrat, every person on the left of the American spectrum lines up even closely with what Second Thought thinks is entirely inaccurate. Right? If they did, Biden wouldn't have been president.
Kind of policies. Pulling the knife back out a couple inches, but leaving it in there to be sure. Because you can't just take out the knife. Where else would the knife go? Away? Wait, the knife could go away? Sorry, I'm getting distracted. The rest of Biden's good-ish policies, well, frankly, there isn't much of a rest to talk about. It's mostly bad stuff. But I know what you're thinking. Surely it can't be so much bad stuff that I can't say it all in a single breath. Well, why don't we find out?
Okay, and he's using footage of Biden having fallen asleep, quote unquote, at the what was this, the UN thing, while he's talking about Biden's bad policies. Okay, he is allowing the visuals to play into what he's talking about to paint this picture, right? Oh, what kind of a president falls asleep? Normal person. The fact that most people don't fall asleep at these things is actually surprising. Now, I'm not saying that he shouldn't have fallen asleep. As someone who like has a say in what goes on in these proceedings, he should probably be awake and paying attention. But that doesn't mean these things aren't boring. And the idea that we're gonna like shit all over him because he got bored and fell asleep. The guy's almost 80 years old. I don't know if I could stay awake, and I'm not even half that age.
Since becoming president, Biden has continued the trend of border detainment and reinforcement between the U.S. and Mexico,
Which is bad.
that has been snowballing from cabinet to cabinet for at least 4 presidents, has deported more people under Title 42 than Trump while defending his administration's use of that right in the courts,
Which is bad, but this on the same subject.
has continued using drone strikes, which, though fewer in number, have still killed civilians, despite the U.S. not being formally at war with any country, and, also it being a war crime and all.
Okay. So then is your problem Biden, or is your problem the hold the military-industrial complex has over our government?
He's called for increasing police budgets and police departments' access to military equipment.
Okay. Same subject, because it's the military industrial complex that sells, well, they don't sell them directly, but the militarization of the police is an extension of that, because the U.S. buys so much equipment that they can't even use it for the army, so then they sell it to local police departments at a ridiculously reduced cost.
Has continued escalating tensions between the U.S. and China, Russia, Venezuela, and Cuba, sanctioned Afghanistan, starving their people in the process.
Okay, and I don't want to bring this up for every single one of these, but this is no different than what any president has done in like the last 30 years, right? So it's funny that he's pointing these things out about Biden, and like I know he has problems with these under Trump, but like this isn't Biden's fault. And while these are not good policies, these aren't policies that Biden like wrote out of nowhere. This has been the trend for literally decades. And the only kind of president that you would get to break these trends is either someone who's contrarian like Trump, who would do it just to spite the person that was in office before him, or someone who is a huge departure from the norm as far as a politician goes, which you don't really see. Like even Bernie Sanders. Even Bernie Sanders' foreign policy kind of lines up with most of this.
Has endorsed the Israeli apartheid government and its inhumane and relentless aggression against and occupation of Palestine. Has continued supplying the Saudis with arms used in Yemen, one of, if not the greatest humanitarian crisis in our lifetime. He's increased the military budget, tried abusing...
Okay, every president has increased the military budget. And also, he's not the one that increases it. That gets passed in Congress. That's part of the congressional budget.
Executive powers and seizing reporters' records before backing down once his plan was exposed. He's pursued the prosecution of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, increased the power of the surveillance state in a set of domestic anti-terrorism.
Okay. That's not... Again, lawmakers. This is not Biden. This is not Biden's agenda. This is Congress.
Policies. Staffed his cabinet with executives from Wall Street and the pharmaceutical, weapons, and fossil fuel industries.
Again, totally normal. And I'm not saying this is good, but this is not a departure from anything anyone else has done. As a matter of fact, this is a step back from what Trump did. So these are all people who worked for those companies, but these are not CEOs. Who did Trump appoint? Literally the CEO of ExxonMobil. Literally the CEO of this. Literally, like... So these are steps back. And again, that doesn't make this good, but this is normal.
Channeled COVID test availability through insurance reimbursement, as opposed to free testing, vastly reducing the actual amount of testing that could have given us a more accurate idea of the state of the pandemic, inconveniencing everyone in the process, ignoring the uninsured and the poor completely, and empowering insurance companies to turn a profit.
Okay, again, that's how this has always worked. So basically everything he's pointed, well, not everything, the majority of things he's pointed out here can literally be boiled down to corporate capture of our government. How is that Biden's fault?
He has taken a passive role in intellectual property waivers for vaccines after declaring that to be one of his administration's key goals, specifically so he could protect the economic interests of American manufacturers, and therefore slowing down the resolution of the pandemic and allowing human casualties and serious infections to continue at their present rate, and also increasing the chance of new variants. He's quietly stripped away protections from endangered species, approved a record number of oil drilling permits, upheld the construction of the Line 3 pipeline, and of course is constantly pressing for compromise with Republicans to thin out ambitious proposals and whining on the sidelines when Manchin or Sinema block a vote instead of using his role as president of the country to apply maximum pressure on their vote.
Okay, so the last thing I will agree with him on, this, what was his name? Or I'm sorry, I forget which president it was. Was it Teddy Roosevelt? It was one of the Roosevelts, talked about the bully pulpit. That the point of a president in a legislative capacity is because the president doesn't actually have any say in legislation. Like, they can veto legislation, but they don't vote on legislation. So when it comes to legislation that they want to get passed, what kind of power do they have? Well, he called it the bully pulpit. And this is more important now than it was then, because we have the news. And we have a crap ton of outlets. There's a 24-hour news cycle. He could literally at any point say certain things to get these things endorsed, right? So all he has to do is constantly hammer home, like, Americans need this. Americans need this. And like, whether you agree with that statement or not, this is what he could have done, and he didn't do that. He actually barely even talked about it, as far as like when it was relevant. And while he tried to hold negotiations with Manchin and Sinema, what were the contents of those negotiations? Well, not a whole lot if Manchin was willing to go against basically his entire constituency to vote the bill down, despite the fact that, as I said before, in West Virginia, where he is a senator from, the weakest agreement was 60%. And Sinema, Nevada is so upset at Sinema that they were trying to get her recalled in the middle of that vote. They were trying to push that process through to get her ousted so they could put someone in who would vote for what the majority of the state wanted.
Whew. One breath. See, I told you it wasn't that bad. I definitely didn't edit out all the dozens of breaths I had to take to get through that massive list. And that's just what's happened while he's been president. The pre-campaign dissections on Biden's decades-long bad record with civil rights, imprisonment, social welfare, sexual assault, war, segregation, and everything else aren't even mentioned here. What a good guy. The point is that when we say the lesser of two evils, we are still contending with this much evil.
Okay, so again, anyone who uses the word evil when they're talking about a politician is talking out of their ass. Politics is about solutions, what we think makes the most sense to solve a problem. There are more than one ways to solve most problems. Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be looking for the most effective or most efficient solution. And this also doesn't mean, like, I don't necessarily disagree with his with Second Thought's political stances, right? I'm willing to bet you that we would probably agree on what most solutions are. But I don't agree that Biden is evil, in the same way that I don't agree that Buttigieg is evil, or what's this guy on the far left? I'm forgetting his name. Whatever. Like, I don't believe any politician in office is evil. They may be greedy, they may be selfish, they may be uninterested in the actual data and information on the subject, on and on and on. But, like, these are people who actually think that what they're doing is, if not because most of them are going to be personally motivated, thinking that the priority is definitely going to be on enriching themselves, right? Like, I don't think that's a thing, but I don't think these people think that what they're doing is hurting people. I think that at best, when they vote on bad legislation that they know is bad legislation, they think it's just not making things better, and that's if they don't think it actually makes things better. But these people live in political bubbles, and I don't mean like echo chamber bubbles. I mean like they're politicians, which means the only people they talk to are other politicians, and most politicians are either rich or come from rich families, which means that they don't face the same struggles that the rest of us do. So this isn't about them doing things to hurt the population. They just don't think that these are problems, or that they think these are the appropriate way of dealing with the problems, or they think that these are enough trimming at the edges to alleviate the worst case scenarios. But that's because they don't actually understand the gravitas of each of these problems that most people in the country face. But again, that's because they're disconnected from normal people because of the wealth that they're involved in their lives, not because of their position of power.
And it's important to know that. As always, sources for this video are in the description. Feel free to fact check any of these claims. Now, faced with this kind of depressing account, you might want to find comfort in local elections.
I do want to point out that anytime he talks about like, oh, links are in the description below, feel free to fact check anything I say. Like, I'm literally going over his video for content. I'm not even going to go through the fact checks. Like, most people, and I shouldn't even say most people, the type of person who would come to this video, watch what he says, because they're likely going to agree with him in the first place, and then do the necessary legwork to go through his site, his references, to then try and point out where he's factually incorrect. And again, he's not factually incorrect, right? So all the things he talked about, I guarantee you, all the references in there are Biden did this, Biden did this, Biden did, right? But the issue isn't the facts. The issue is his interpretation of the facts, which you're not going to get in a fact check.
Where it feels like your vote actually counts for something, and your values of equality, justice, and the basic safety and decent life of all people are guaranteed. But there too, in states and cities where Democrats act as a one-party state, their political decisions continue to hurt everyday people in the same way they do at the national level. Like a newly renovated wall in an elevator shaft, you're getting screwed at every level. From an advanced militarized police state in New York City, to a regressive local and state tax rate in deep blue Washington, where the poorest 20% pay over 5 times more in taxes relative to the top 1%, the Democratic record doesn't improve simply by lowering the scale to local politics. It's also, of course, in blue states where affordable housing is hardest to find. Education is most sharply divided between the rich and the poor, and inequality is rising fastest, to name just a few issues.
Okay, so then and I'm sure he would agree to this, right? But the issue isn't that neoliberalism is the problem. This isn't about politics, right? This is about classism. The issue is that the people who make decisions about policy are from this upper class, who don't deal with these issues, who don't have that perspective. But how many people in Congress grew up in poverty? How many people in Congress grew up in single-parent households? How many people in poverty had to pay for college on their own? How many people in Congress had to take out student loans to go through college, right? So every single one of these issues that he's talked about, yes, these massively affect poor people. And I'm sorry, I shouldn't even talk about Congress, right? How many people, even at a state level, have to go through these issues? So this is not about a political system being skewed in that direction because of neoliberalism, because of and I'm not saying that I think neoliberalism is good. I think it's dumb. I think its perspective is awful, right? But this is not just the result of these things is not just because of neoliberal politics. It's because of the people in positions of power who don't come from these backgrounds, who don't have to deal with these issues, therefore they don't understand them. Therefore they don't understand why we have these issues, which means that they also don't understand how we resolve these issues. And because they have no vested interest in understanding any of this, because they don't face any of it, the only thing they care about is maintaining their position of power. And how do you do that? Well, there's a couple of ways. Primarily, it's by solving people's problems, but the other way is by how most political campaigns are run, right? How often do you hear about, oh, this is the policy they want to do, and here are the specifics as on how I'm going to achieve it, versus how many political ads do you hear, oh, this is what my opponent's done, this is why he's a bad person, or she. So it's not that neoliberalism is exactly the problem. Or at the very least, it's not even the source of the problem.
After hearing all this, you might hear a voice in your head telling you that this is still the party of lesser evil. And most of the time, you're probably right. All of this could have just as easily happened under the previous guy. Not to mention the staffing of courts by far-right judges, the relatively greater number of bombs dropped, the total and unabashed environmental deregulation, the bolstering of fascist networks and far-right militias, and that list goes on too. But it still remains the case that defending a party that so easily casts you and the people you care for aside does not win you anything. If they cannot care about you this much, why care so much about them? Much more beneficial to the realization of your values and the way you want to see the world work is to spend maybe 2% of your time on pushing these institutions to the extent they will allow it, voting for whoever does the least harm in the short term, and the rest of the energy you set aside for politics, the 98% remaining, into bettering the world directly. Spend 15 minutes every 4 years slipping the paper into the box or pushing a touchscreen, and then spend the massive amount of time in between doing stuff that matters. Half of this country doesn't vote, and you've never seen that convince a Democrat to move left. So work outside elections. If it's mutual aid, it's mutual aid. If it's learning more about how to organize, what different political theories offer, general education about the plight and suffering caused under our current economic and political model, then do that. If it's informing others and winning them to your side, spend your energy there. It is infinitely more valuable to create systems that resolve the problems you see directly when possible, to directly improve people's lives and fight to change the system that constantly underpromises and still manages to underdeliver, than it is to fight tirelessly within the framework of a system built on preserving the decaying status quo.
I forgot to unmute myself. So I don't disagree with anything he just said here. That's all good stuff. But one thing that he kind of passed over is he didn't talk about local action, right? So everything he's talked about as far as politics goes is on a national scale. Why isn't he bringing up things like knowing who your local judges are and voting for them? Paying attention to who your sheriff is and voting for them? Paying attention to who your local councilmen are and voting for them, right? Because and we see these signs all the time when these people are running for office, right? And we vote on these people. They come up at the same time as national level elections or state level elections, like, and that's intentional, right? So that you're not voting, so that you don't have to vote like 5 different times throughout the year. You go in and you vote once on a large list of things. Some of them are local, some of them are state, and some of them are national. But why doesn't he talk about this? Well, for 2 things. One, the audience for this information is going to be much, much smaller, right? Even if you're talking about on a state level, you're going to get a lot less interest when you're talking about New York politics or Florida politics or Oklahoma politics or California politics than you would if you were talking about American politics. So being able to make a living off of that, because the audience is so much smaller, is much, much more difficult. Additionally, it requires the same level of effort, right? You still have to know who the players are. You still have to know what policies are being talked about and what's looking to get passed. You still have to understand the same information as far as like who the... I don't mean like politicians players, but you still have to know who the players in the game are. So the local companies or the state level companies and the actions being done there to influence the votes. So it requires all of the same efforts and it has less of a payout. Additionally, and he doesn't bring this up, but you have much more power on the local level than you do on a national level, right? You're one person voting within a state, and it's an all or nothing win when it comes to the presidential election, which is primarily what we do on a national level. But even when it comes to voting for your state congress people, right? The only people who go to vote for your state representatives and your senators are the people who live in your state. So even there, you are dramatically empowered in that decision, right? And so as we come closer and closer and closer to home, your power grows and grows and grows as far as these elections go. But again, smaller audiences, less ability to make money off of it. And I'm not faulting him for that, right? In the sense that, like, if this is what you want to do to make money, if this is what you want to do for a living, you are going to want to appeal to the largest audience. I get that. But you can do both. You can call for local action and still cover national level things.
Everyday people's influence on a government of plutocrats is nearly zero. Working to change that government, or making it increasingly irrelevant through networks of solidarity, that is where your influence and your mark on the world will be the most felt. I understand that this isn't for everybody, that spending time on politics is exhausting and difficult and never feels like it amounts to much. The thing is that you're probably already doing it. There's a chance you will have spent a tremendous amount of energy fighting tooth and nail for the lesser evil, and come out on the other side with only meager rewards for your efforts. Insignificant compared to what you put in. Practically nothing. Spend that energy better.
Damn it, I forgot to unmute myself again. So again, the idea that like your efforts seem, I don't want to say wasted because that's not what he said, but the effort put in seems to have very little payout because again, you're talking about national level stuff. Why not talk about, like, you're one person in a bucket of 330 million people trying to affect the direction the water is going in that bucket. What if you reduce the size of that bucket? How many people live in the state of Nebraska? How many people live in the state of Nevada? How many people live in the city that you live in? How many people live in the district of the city that you live in?
People who spend day and night talking about the lesser evil and harm reduction, either in the run-up to a big election, or whenever someone starts critiquing the other kind of boys in blue, know this. It's a purposeful distraction and reduction from what politics really is. Organizing human society, not the spectacle of 2 guys duking it out. Nurture within yourself the voice that is already there, telling you that the Democrats aren't doing enough for you, and resist them at every turn.
Okay, he had me until he used the word resist, right? You shouldn't be resisting what the Democrats are doing. If this is the party that is doing more for you than the other party, you shouldn't be resisting them. You should be pushing them to do more, right? if someone isn't coming close enough to you, you don't push them back. You grab them and you pull them towards you, right? So why would you not do that with political action? You don't push back against the Democrats in a literal sense, right? If they're not coming far enough, you push them to go farther. Now, whether that means through political action, whether that means through voting, whether that means through activism, or whatever means you take, it shouldn't be about resisting the Democratic Party. If you're going to resist anything in regards to the Democratic Party, it should be resisting their appeal to moneyed interests, resisting their appeal to appeasing the other side, who clearly don't care about, I don't want to get too far into that, but why are we trying to work with people who won't work with us, right? When Mitch McConnell literally says this is where legislation comes to die, during Obama's presidency, when Mitch McConnell, I'm sorry, oh my God, the Democratic guy, Mitch, I am blanking on the names right now. Mitch McConnell. Hang on a second. Joe Manchin was the name I was searching for, right? If you want to push back against Joe Manchin, who wouldn't even negotiate what he wanted to include in the bill, he just wanted things taken out. Well, okay, so what if I take out, like, this is a misattribution of where your effort should go. You shouldn't be resisting the Democratic Party. You should be resisting the negative things the Democratic Party is doing, because not everything they're doing is bad. They're at least closer to your direction, to your side of the political aisle than the Republicans. And now I'm rambling, but let's keep going.
If you live in a safely blue state and don't have to worry about the even worse party getting through, vote third party unashamedly. The spoiler effect of first-past-the-post voting is a built-in feature of our electoral system, and threatening a party that does not give us enough where it feels safest is incredibly minor, but necessary to scaring them of our collective power. If you work...
Okay, but that's not... The problem is that they control the narrative when it comes to these things, right? Bernie Sanders, right? Bernie Sanders was literally... He went from a no-name congressman to the most popular politician in the country within a few months of campaigning against Hillary Clinton, who is the most hated politician in the country. But what was the narrative when it came to Hillary losing to Donald Trump? Oh, it's because the Bernie bros didn't show up. Except there were more people who voted for Bernie in the primary that then voted for Hillary in the general than there were Hillary supporters who voted for Hillary in the primary but then voted for Barack Obama. So why is that narrative never talked about? Well, besides the fact that Obama won, right? It's because the people in positions of power aren't interested in these conversations, right? And it's also a justification. These are people in positions of power trying to justify their loss. Well, who do they point to? Whoever the fuck they need to say that's why we lost. I mean, look at what Hillary Clinton said when she was going around talking about that book. She blamed Putin, she blamed Russia, she blamed Bernie bros, she blamed the media. Like, anyone that she could point the finger at besides herself is where she pointed. Why is that? Because they're not actually interested in why they lost. They're just trying to justify why they lost to the people who voted for them, so that when they go and run again, those people will vote for them again. And then they will use that pressure of, oh, they lost last time because of you, you better go vote for them. That then works in their favor, rather than actually addressing the problem of why they lost. So these are people who are not actually interested in why they lost, in the same way that they're not actually interested in what policies make the most sense. They're only interested in maintaining their positions of power because, again, like, these things don't affect them. You think Pete Buttigieg is impacted by trans bills? You think he's impacted by child tax credits? You think he's impacted by military spending or the reduction of that? You think he's impacted by whether we do what is it called, the shelter first, the housing policy, where like the home, like, you think he's affected by how we deal with homeless people, like which avenue we take to address that? None of these things affect these people, so of course they don't care.
in an industry that is already unionized or has the potential to be, use your collective power there too to get the gains you are owed and resist the people desperate to wrestle them away from you. By all means, pull the lever on the trolley, but then get off and start ripping apart the train tracks. I know that this is an idealistic narrative that's easy to cast aside, but really meditate on how much of your everyday life is poured into obsessing over what happens in a room full of old, wealthy people made almost completely unaccountable to you and me. And
why are they unaccountable? Why? I love how he points out these problems in the video, but then doesn't discuss them.
think about where that energy could go instead. Elections are not without their importance, but under a political and economic model where they will always stop short of actually representing our collective interests, they will never be what politics is really about. For one thing, it's because these systems weren't built with democracy in mind. The birth of the Republic happened at a very particular moment in history, when revolutionaries wanted to throw out the kings. Once they figured that out, they had a list of ideas about what they wanted to do with society, and they built their political and economic system accordingly, creating institutions that would deliver the changes they saw fit, not pristine displays of human democracy. The Founding Fathers were terrified of democracy.
Okay, he's actually talking about... So, the narrative about the Founding Fathers is that, like, oh, they were these visionaries, and they were absolutely interested in democracy. Oh, is that why only the people who owned land at the time were able to vote? Which was basically the American aristocracy, which was just replacing one set of aristocracy for another. Why do we not talk about how... we the people didn't really actually refer to all the citizens and only referred to all the landowning citizens, right? Like the idea that these people even believed that all men were granted equal rights, but then held slaves, like... So the hypocrisy is literally laid bare. Yes, these people did not come up with these systems because they believed that every person should have a say in how things go. It's that they wanted a say, and then they found ways to make it so that they had the say.
The idea that those dirty poors should have a say, and they built a political order explicitly on the idea of giving a few wealthy landowning whites the power to decide the politics and economy of a nation. Whatever mechanism let them do that is the one they kept and enshrined in a constitution. It's no accident that we have first past the post voting and politics based on territorial representation over political pluralism. It's what keeps the same people in power election after election and keeps any challenger party out. It's no accident that the country is led by a single guy with almost infinite political power. The Founding Fathers kinda liked the idea of a monarchy.
Okay, no, that's not true. Also, the president's power has been drastically increased over the years, right? Executive orders were not a thing when the presidency was first created. So have we slipped back into a hierarchical understanding of political power? Yeah, sure, I'll agree to that. But that wasn't their original intention. Like, you're talking about people that were pissed off that one guy had all the say, and then they would design a system that would allow one guy to have all the say. And if that's true, why did George Washington say, no, a president should not be a lifetime appointment? Sure, maybe he was the only guy, but no other president stayed in for a lifetime. And none of them wanted to stay in for a lifetime. Now, they didn't implement any rules about the number of terms a president could have until after FDR won like 5 times in a row. Which, that's another subject. But, these weren't guys that were interested in consolidating power with one person. They wanted power, but not as individuals. Because that's where they came from, and that wasn't what they wanted. Now, they didn't mean they wanted to share it with everybody, but they wanted it distributed more equally so that one guy couldn't have all the say. They literally fought a war over that.
One guy with all the power. Mono meaning one, archy meaning power. Just not from an unelected, snaggle-toothed Brit. It is no accident that the only real way to gain political power in this country is by cozying up to corporations and the wealthy, to be in the good books of the media institutions that reach into every American household.
Okay, wait, but that's a recent development. That's not how it always used to be. let's just ignore the consolidation of media into 6 companies over the last 30 years. Let's just ignore, oh crap, what was it called? Citizens United, which equated money to speech, which was not a thing before. Like, that's not how this has always worked. Does that work? Does it work this way now? And is that terrible? Yes, but this ignores the reality. Like, it wasn't designed this way.
It's what keeps revolutionaries out. The point is, even if we all have the right to vote today, well, except if you're under 18, a felon, not a citizen, forced to work that day, don't have the kind of ID that is now the right kind of...
Okay, so maybe me living in California means that this is like specifically a California law, and I don't know if this applies across the country, but your employer is legally required to give you 2 hours to go vote. Is that enough time to go vote? Right? But like, also, if you can't get the day off, it's called early voter registration. It's called mail-in ballots. And those have been a thing for literally decades. So this idea that like, the rest of the things I agree with, but I don't even know if 18-year-olds should be able to vote, because how many of those people actually have their own understanding of politics, right? And if that's the argument that like, oh, well, should people who haven't arrived at their own conclusion on politics actually be able to vote? Well, I hate to break it to you, but that's a lot of people who are way over that age, who just believe what they were told when they were younger and then agree with whatever party they were raised as, right? The people switching parties as they get older is very rare.
All of a sudden, you've been purged off a voter roll, have a disability that makes it impossible or nearly so to get to the polls, or generally speaking are part of some racial group your politician doesn't like. Just forget all that for a second. Even if we, quote, all have the right to vote today, we are still doing so within the bounds of institutions that are built around preserving a very specific status quo and the power of a wealthy few. People complain that Congress doesn't do anything because, well, yeah, that's the point.
No, that's not. It's not the point, right? Congress isn't supposed to not do anything, but the point is that you're supposed to have debate on these things. That it's supposed to be difficult for big scale things to get changed. So, can you imagine what it would look like if it was just whatever president was in office got to choose all the legislation that got passed? The swing from what Obama wanted to what Trump wanted to what Biden wanted would have been massive over, 12 years? We're talking about huge changes to immigration. We're talking about huge changes to finances. We're talking about huge changes to regulation. We're talking about huge change. Like, it's not supposed to be easy to make these big, massive changes, because big, massive changes affect a lot of people. And if we don't all agree that this is the proper route to take, then we shouldn't be taking that route. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say all. If most of us don't agree. Now, if you want to make the argument that the people in these positions of representation don't actually represent the people that they're supposed to be representing, again, that is a different argument. But that's not what he's saying here. Which, if he was, I would agree with it, because I do think that's the problem.
Under a political system like this one, and an economic model that allows a few people to exploit it to its limit, your values of egalitarianism, of justice, of guaranteeing people a decent life are just not going to be realized. And certainly never to the extent that you think is morally correct. You're a good person. You want the best for yourself, for your family, for your friends, and for the rest of the regular, decent people in this country and around the world. The kinds of things we all want for our fellow human beings aren't going to happen as long as someone can go digging for power in deeper pockets. And as long as the capitalist neoliberal status quo remains in place, there will always be deeper pockets than yours and mine.
So then, are you for public funding of campaigns? Are you for stricter regulation as far as like who can donate to campaigns? Are you for strengthened what are they called? Enforcement groups for following the campaign financial guidelines, right? Like, because there are rules that are in place. They just break them all the time because there are no consequences for them. In the same way that, like, when it comes to, like, tax fraud, right? Who commits most of the tax fraud? Well, the wealthy people. Well, why? Because they know that the enforcement mechanisms don't have the funding to go after them, because they can just hire teams of lawyers to stall them and waste the resources, right? So it's not he is grossly oversimplifying the root causes of these problems.
I realized that for some of my audience, this video may have come across as fairly accusatory. I definitely don't intend to attack anyone's beliefs, but it is important that we all get on the same page about just how ineffective liberalism really is. Changing your perspective isn't something any of us can do overnight. It takes dedication, hard work, and deconstructing some of the erroneous beliefs we hold.
Actually, the idea that you can change someone's mind on any topic is actually really illogical, right? So we know that what moves people is stories and emotional arguments. So unless... and that is problematic, because you probably shouldn't be making policy decisions as to like what direction the country should go based on how people feel about a thing. We should probably go based on what makes the most sense to address the problem, right? But we know that appealing to people's logic is not the best approach. And when you're confronting someone about things that are linked to their core beliefs, this triggers the same parts of your brain that are triggered during survival, your flight and fight response. So when you confront people on these subjects, you're not convincing them. Their perception of it is you are literally attacking them. So, and as someone who had their beliefs changed, it wasn't because someone logicked their way into explaining a better position. It wasn't because someone pointed out the intellectual holes in my views. It was personal stuff, which I've explained briefly in another video. But the point is that like you don't change minds through logic and reasoning, or if you do, those people are incredibly rare.
To make that easier for people, I try my best to learn and understand as much as I can so that I can share it with others. And one way I like to do that is by listening to audiobooks. I travel a lot for work, so I have plenty of time to sit on planes and listen to...
Okay, you can chill on your own time and not mine. Yeah, so actually let's just see if he says anything else besides... No, more about the audiobooks. Audible. Yep, okay, that was it. So, pay attention to the language that people use when they talk about these things, right? Do you know anyone who's evil? Even if what they believe is gross and disgusting, like people who think that immigrants are dirty people, or people who think that gay people are gay by choice, or people who think that trans people just are suffering from a mental illness and need help, right? Like, there's... Despicable beliefs don't mean that these people are evil, right? They just don't understand the root causes of these problems, or they don't understand all the factors that go into things, right? Like, so like people who think poor people are poor because they just choose to be lazy, right? It's not that they're because would you reward a lazy person? No, right? It's just that you understand that poor people aren't poor because they're lazy. So genuinely, most people, especially when it comes to voting, but when it comes to their political ascriptions, aren't doing things that they think are going to harm people. They are doing the things that they think are going to help people. Now, I would argue that a politician's job should be to convince people this is the appropriate policy on how we resolve this issue. But that's not what they talk about. Why is that? Well, because their only interest is getting back into their position of power, because that's what allows them to, quote unquote... this is getting off topic, but the point ultimately is that their job and how they keep their job are misaligned. The incentive structures are not set up so that by convincing people how you solve the problem is how they keep their position in office, which there's a lot of factors, and I'm not going to get too far into that. The point being is that this isn't about neoliberalism being a failed concept, that this is the root of all the problems in our system, because it's not. It's never that simple. As much as I get pissed off at Republicans or conservatives who say, like, oh, this is the reason for this thing, like, what did second thought do? We've literally attributed all of the issues that we're dealing with when it comes to our voting system on neoliberalism. It's never that simple, ever. Anyone who ever tells you this is the reason why this problem exists, and it is only this, and there are no other factors involved, is lying to you, is wrong, and you should never listen to them. And that includes me. If I ever say that this singular thing is how we resolve anything, I'm an idiot. I don't know what I'm talking about. Stop listening. So anyways, thanks again, as always, for stopping by. And I hope to see you next time. I will be streaming regularly on Tuesdays and Thursdays, starting between 7 and 8, because my schedule is kind of